Karen climbs upstairs and lies down on the bed, relieved to be alone. Bridget had made her feel uncomfortable. Maybe a nap before Tom gets home will help get rid of her pounding headache. She is rigid on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling. She's going to be charged with murder. Everything would still be perfect, she thinks bitterly, tears leaking down the sides of her face, if it weren't for Robert finding her. She wonders how he did it 3 years later. How was he able to track her down? Finally, she crawls under the covers and falls into a brief, exhausted sleep. Rosbach sits at his desk and rubs his tired eyes. He picks up the picture of Georgina Trainer again and thinks about Karen Krupp in her comfortable suburban home. She's probably frightened out of her wits, he thinks. His next thought: she's been frightened before and found a way out. She's a survivor. He looks at the facts, the way he's been trained to do. Married woman fakes death, turns up somewhere else with new identity. 3 years later, the husband she left behind turns up dead, and it looks like she was there. He knows what it looks like, but he mustn't jump to conclusions. If she was a battered wife trying to escape an unbearable situation, then truth be told, he's sympathetic to her. He's sympathetic to any woman who's ever been driven to take such an extreme measures to protect herself. These things shouldn't happen, but he knows they do every day. The system does a rather poor job of protecting these women, and he knows it. It's a damaged, messed up world. He's feeling very negative tonight. It's not like him. He wants to solve the case. He always wants to solve the case. He thinks he knows what happened here, and he thinks he knows why. But then it would go out of his hands into the hands of the lawyers, and there's no predicting what will happen. The whole thing depresses him. He thinks about Tom Krupp. He tries to imagine what he must be going through, but he can't quite. Rosbach has never been married. The right woman has eluded him all these years. Perhaps it's because of the job. Maybe he will still meet her someday. And when he does, he tells himself, taking another look at the photo of Georgina Trainer, he'll do a thorough background check on her himself. Tom has come home again, and they've had a quiet dinner together, with only the scrape of cutlery on plates to break the silence. Now Karen stares out of the living room window into the darkness, unwilling to go to bed. She'll only stare at the ceiling again. She tells herself that there's no one out there. Robert is dead. There's no one to be afraid of now, except for that detective, and she's terrified of him. Tom's upstairs in his office working late. She doesn't know how he can work at a time like this. Perhaps it's his way of avoiding thinking about things. He'd rather stare at lines of numbers than into his own appalling future. She doesn't blame him. Her own thoughts are driving her crazy. Rosbach is going to be back. She's sure of it. She's wound up tight as if poised for a flight. But she's made Tom a promise. She has to place her faith in Jack Calvin. She decides to go upstairs and have a long, hot bath. Maybe it will help her relax. She puts her head in the upstairs office and tells Tom. He looks up briefly and nods and looks back at his computer screen. She turns away and goes into the bathroom and starts filling the tub, trying to decide between bubble bath and Epsom salts. But what does it matter? Rosbach is still going to arrest her. As her eyes fall briefly on the vanity, she freezes. Something's wrong. Her pulse begins to race. Her heart knocks painfully against her ribs, and she feels slightly dizzy. She scans the vanity quickly, trying to take in the details. It's her perfume. Someone has taken the stopper off her perfume. She knows it wasn't her. Karen stares at the perfume bottle, paralyzed with fear, as if she's found a snake curled on the vanity. She didn't use that perfume today. She's certain of it. And she would never leave the stopper off. Tom! She calls his name frantically, but he doesn't seem to hear her over the rushing water of the taps. He runs down the hall to his office, screaming his name. She collides with him in the office doorway. What is it? Tom asks her, his eyes wild. Before she can find the words to tell him, he rushes past her into the bathroom. She comes up behind him. What? What is it? He asks. He can't seem what's scaring her so badly, but he's infected by her panic. Karen points at the perfume bottle with the stopper lying on the vanity behind it. My perfume. Someone took the stopper off. It wasn't me. Tom looks at the perfume bottle, then back at her, relieved but irritated. Is that all? Are you sure? Maybe you just left it off and forgot. No, Tom, I didn't, she says sharply. She could tell that he doesn't believe her. Karen, he says, you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you're just forgetting things. You know what the doctor said. I can hardly keep things straight these days myself. Yesterday I left my car keys in the office and had to go all the way back up to get them. That's you, she says, not me. She looks at him and she can feel a hardness coming into her eyes. I can't afford not to notice details like this, she says, her voice taking on the tone of an underlying rage. Because for years, if I didn't do something just right, if things weren't just so, I get the living shit beat out of me. So I noticed the little things, and I did not leave the stopper off that perfume bottle. Someone has been in this house. Okay, calm down, Tom says. Don't tell me to calm down, she screams at him. They stand in the small bathroom, facing one another. She can see that he's as shocked as she is at her reaction. Her raw emotion has unsettled and appalled them both. They've never been this way with each other before. Then she notices the bathtub and hurries over to turn off the taps before the tub overflows. She straightens up and looks at him. She's calmer now, but still frightened. I'm sorry, Tom. I did not mean to yell at you, but someone must have been in here. Karen, Tom says, he's using a soothing tone as if he's speaking to a child. Your former husband is dead. Who else would break into our house? Any ideas? When she says nothing, Tom asks rather delicately, do you want me to call the police? She can't tell for sure if he's being sarcastic. Do you want me to call the police about an open perfume bottle? Or whether he's just exhausted and overwhelmed with everything that's happened. But there's something in his tone. No, don't call the police, she says. When he stands there saying nothing further, she says, go, I'm going to have a bath. He leaves, and she locks the bathroom door behind him.